Hi, my name is Megan Pollock, and I'm the chair of the Professional Development Team for the American Society for Engineering Education's Committee on Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. I'm also founder and chief inclusion engineer for Engineer Inclusion. I'm glad that you've chosen to access the recording of this virtual workshop. I've edited the recording to trim out any portions unnecessary for the core content and any lulls from discussion groups or pauses. Hopefully, this creates a better viewing experience for you. We hope you'll participate in our live events like this one was, and we welcome your feedback to help us improve our offerings. After all, our mission is to increase visibility and discussion of diversity issues, to help develop inclusive environments for all engineers to thrive, and to facilitate and encourage use of translatable strategies that enable both bottom-up and top-down empowerment. Thanks again for tuning in, and we hope you'll stay in touch with us.
And without further ado, I want to introduce you to Deanna, and I'll give her a chance to do a full introduction. But Deanna submitted a proposal to our committee this past fall, I think, to present a workshop for the ASEE conference. And we really love what she had to say because she was particularly talking about the Indigenous peoples of Canada. And since we were going to be in Canada, it felt really more salient than any other kind of thing that we'd seen. And so we had asked her to be our distinguished lecturer. So she still is going to be a distinguished lecturer at the conference this summer. But as you all know, it's going to look really different. And so
thank you for your patience. And it's so nice to see familiar faces. Thank you so much, everybody who joined today. I'm really, really honored to be here and to be talking about a topic that is near and dear to my heart, which is Indigeneering. And I'll get a little bit more into my own definition of that as we move forward. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional territories of which I am presenting from, the traditional territories of the people of Treaty 7 region in southern Alberta, which includes the Blackfoot Confederacy, which is the Siksika, the Piikani, and the Kainai First Nations, as well as the Tsuut'ina Nation, and the Stoney Nakoda, including the Chiniki, Bearspaw, and Wesley First Nations. And the city of Calgary is also home to the Matey Nation of Alberta, Region 3. And I would like to say, from my own personal perspective, I am from Treaty 8, from Fond du Lac First Nation, Northern Saskatchewan, born in Edmonton, Treaty 6 territory, raised in Calgary and Singapore. So I'm honored. I consider myself a guest to these traditional lands, and I'm honored to be doing this work here. And it really warms my heart to see land acknowledgements occurring more frequently, and not only in Indigenous space topics and presentations. And I'm trying to help folks really get comfortable in looking inward and asking what that means for them. I think one of the most important things about land acknowledgements is the meaning behind it when you do it. The personal meaning, whether you are Indigenous or non-Indigenous, and what our role is in moving forward together in the right way. So, which brings me to the breakout room guidelines I'd like to put forward today. One of the things that is very important to me in this work, particularly in very Western colonial type spaces, is learning a new way to show up and learning a new way to be. We think that the default system is the way to be until we can see the value and the beauty in learning how to show up a different way. And I have gotten deep learning and meaning out of talking circles in an Indigenous way. And I found that talking circles are practiced, the protocols may differ from region to region or nation to nation, but the intent is the same wherever I go. And the intent is really creating that safe, brave space to show up where everyone's voice is equally valued and everyone's voice is equally heard. And when one person is talking, everyone else's responsibility and accountability is to listen with an open heart and listen with respect. And because sometimes, especially if we're in tough conversations, it can be so easy to spend your time worrying what you're going to say when the circle gets to you. And so reminding yourself that it's not about you, but it's about the collective that's coming together. And so I'd just like to ask that when you get into your breakout sessions, feel like it's a safe space. Feel like it is a space where you can share from the heart, you can show up fully, and then commit to creating that space for other people in the group. And keep what is said and who said it confidentially unless you have express permission. So if somebody says something in your breakout sessions that really resonates with you and you would love to share it, just ask that person first, even in a private chat, you know, hey, I really love what you said, can I share it? And it's just to honor that space so people can feel more comfortable being themselves. And one of the reasons that I've started sharing this in engineering type environments is because it does create a different relationship and connection, even in my classrooms with my students or with colleagues and coworkers. So going forward with that, I wanted to talk a little bit about territorial acknowledgement because it's so important as engineers and educators that we understand the traditional territory in which we live and work and those in which our projects take place. So if we are designing anything from a road to a pipeline to a water treatment system, as engineers, understanding the deep connection to the land the Indigenous peoples have and respecting that connection and taking the time to learn what that means. That it's more than just a regulatory stakeholder conversation. It's really truly seeing things through a different lens. So for our first breakout, just to get things started and kind of bring up the energy, and it's really hot. I'm so much more an in-person extrovert, so this has been challenging. So I really hope you enjoy the next few minutes we have together. But I'd like you to go into your breakout rooms, and thank you so much, Megan, for helping with the logistics of this and just being such a guide through this new experience. I'd like you to go on your phones or your computers, take a moment and visit that link at nativeland.ca. Understanding that it's not going to be perfect and it's ever evolving. And so also if you are on your traditional territory, feel free to share that. Locate the traditional territory that you are on. See if you can find guidance on pronunciation, but due to limited time, please, I want you to feel comfortable just to do your best right now. If you were to do a land acknowledgement, you know, in real life, if you were to do a land acknowledgement at an event or something like that, I would advise you to reach out to somebody from that traditional territory and ask them how they prefer their territory or their land to be acknowledged, and ask for the pronunciation. So I don't want that to hold you back in the breakout sessions. And then go around in the circle. You can decide how you want to, since we're not actually sitting in a circle, who goes first, and you know, just support one another. And maybe whoever goes first can choose somebody in your breakout session to pass the mic over.
Okay, so I'm going to put you all in small groups of 3 to 4. Is that okay, Deanna? Or do you want a little bit larger groups? Yes,
that's perfect.
Okay, great. All right, everybody ready? The link is in the chat box, so go ahead and click that. I'm not sure if it goes away when I put you in the breakout rooms. So here we go. Ready, set, go.
Okay. Welcome back, everyone. I hope that that went well. I'm just going to open the chat box if I can figure out how to do that, or not. Okay, so when I'm screen sharing with the full screen, I can't see chats that are typed. So Megan, if something comes up, you have we're more than welcome to
Will do.
let me know. Okay. So one thing that I wanted to just say in closing, first of all, I'd like to ask somebody from each breakout room to just share a little bit about the experience and kind of, if we can. Sorry.
Well, we had 11 groups. You may not want 11 report outs for the sake of time. But
okay. Well, let's not do that this time. Feel free to put it in the chat if you wanted to share how that went, like just something that surprised you. Did you learn something new? Did you have any questions on how to do it going forward? Put that in the chat, because I think we can download the chat transcript after. And then the next time we're going to do one more breakout towards the end, and then maybe Megan, if I could ask you to break out different groups with larger numbers, and then we can report back. That works? Okay, great. I will share one tip from Bob Joseph, is somebody that I really consider a teacher and a mentor. He has done Indigenous corporate training for many years. He is in British Columbia. And one of the tips that he gave years ago when I first started down this journey was when he's going to a new nation, he will sometimes wait till after hours and call the band office to listen to how they pronounce their nation. So if you don't know anyone from the nation and you're about to go visit someone, that's a little tip that Bob gave that I thought was just brilliant. Okay, so a little bit about Indigeneering. I came up with, I thought of the word, I think it was probably around 2008. I'm sure Brangelina were still together, and I thought, hey, let's put two words together. I was really trying to get Indigenous youth to see that they could have a place in the world of engineering, because I found a lot of the youth that I spoke to felt that it was an either or conversation, that they either were for Mother Earth or they went into a career that had an impact on development. And so I really believed by that point I'd already been in engineering for almost 10 years. And I really believe that I'd committed my passion for the environment and for Mother Earth and integrated that into my work and integrated that into the work that I did. And so I came up with this definition really to encourage youth to see themselves in this world and know that we as Indigenous people have been scientists, innovators, and engineers for time immemorial, even though we may be very underrepresented in the Western world of engineering. To give you an example of what we're seeing in Alberta and Canada, we have over 70,000 members of our engineering and geoscience regulator. And the last time it was asked, members were asked to self-identify as Indigenous, so First Nations, Matey, or Inuit. I think the number was around 232 that self-identified as Indigenous out of over 70,000. So we are growing. There's more Indigenous engineers today than there was when I first came into the profession, and part of my passion is to really create spaces for Indigenous people to feel like their voices and their perspectives are valued. I work to integrate the 7 sacred Anishinaabeg teachings in my work, and those teachings are love, respect, courage, honesty, wisdom, humility, and truth. And I just wanted to start off with that because I really am guided by the teachings, but it's also important to me to acknowledge where those teachings come from. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that. So here's some poll questions. If we have time to do these, Megan, is this something that we could do, or should I just provide these questions after?
No, we can do it. I got it set up.
Oh, very cool. Okay, let's do
it. Hopefully this one works this time.
It just gives me an idea of where we're coming from, and and to the Indigenous folks that are on this call, I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for joining this conversation today. So can I close the results box?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So just for those that aren't familiar with Indigenous peoples in Canada, I'd like to open this up with humbly saying I'm a student on this journey on my own. I'm part of the 60 Scoop. I was adopted out of my community at 5 months old, and I was raised by non-Indigenous parents and grew up away from the culture until I found my birth mother at 22. And so this journey for me has been one of reconnection. It's been one of continuously being open to learning and unlearning. And so in Canada, when we say Indigenous, we are referring to First Nations, Matey, and Inuit people. And they comprise 1.4 million people in Canada. It's the fastest growing demographic and youngest, increasingly more urban and less on reserves. There's 634 First Nations communities in Canada. There's over 50 different nations, over 50 languages, and terminology is important, and it varies. I noticed that the terminology in the United States is different. Native American and Hawaiian and Alaska natives, and you know, it's continuously evolving in terms of what is preferred. In Canada, in the Constitution, we are referred to as Aboriginal people, and that is still used in a legal context, but Indigenous is becoming more preferred, but everyone has different perspectives. So I certainly do not speak for all Indigenous people. And I would say if you're working directly with a nation, to really allow the self-determination, allow them to self-identify, and both from a nation perspective and from an individual perspective. Matey people in Canada, I am not Matey. Originally, the word Matey means mixed, and they were initially of mixed ancestry between settlers and First Nations, predominantly French, but there's difference there, and I would defer to somebody who is Matey to really broaden that definition for themselves. Again, it's that self-determination and self-identification. So I'm sharing what I've learned, but I don't speak, I'm not Métis. In 2003, the Supreme Court of Canada affirmed that Métis people hold the same Aboriginal right to hunt for food as recognized in Section 35 of the Canadian Constitution. And then who are recognized as Métis by the Canadian government. It's not just genetics, it's not just blood, it's actually, the Canadian government does not recognize blood quantum as much as what I understand the American government too. I noticed that there's some chat things coming up. Megan, is there anything I need to know about?
There's a comment on, also known as ask what the preferred terminology is, from Kayla. Susan says recognizing sovereignty and self-determination are critically important. So just comment.
Yes, thank you. Yes, and that self-identification piece is so important. And what I've learned, and again, there are different perspectives and opinions on this, but to prove membership with the Canadian government as Métis, it's not just an ancestral connection, but as being part, it's the connection to community. So Inuit people in Canada, people of the North, the Inuit are Indigenous people living primarily in Inuit and Nunangat, and I majority live in 51 communities up north, and approximately 60% of Inuit people can conduct a conversation in their language, which is, I think is just wonderful. A lot of our nations are seeing our languages, because of our history and because of the history with residential schools, or I think in the United States, they're referred to as boarding schools. we were disconnected from our culture and our language. And so, and another thing that in terms of terminology being important, from a respect standpoint, Eskimo is considered a pejorative term. And so it's suggested that it be avoided. A little bit about my background, as I mentioned, I was born at 0 months old. Sorry, I was adopted at 5 months old. And if you look up on this map, my First Nation is right near the northern border of Saskatchewan. And so I put Washington, D.C. there just to give you an idea of how long of a drive it would be to Fond du Lac First Nation. I also have relatives in Fort Chipewyan, and I have not yet visited Fond du Lac, but I have had the chance to visit my traditional territory in Fort Chipewyan, and it was deeply, deeply meaningful for me to reconnect with the community there, and I do hope to make the trip to Fond du Lac. Can we use the annotation here? If you go up to the top of your bar, annotation, if you wouldn't mind just clicking where you are on the map.
I think that's just an annotation tool for you. The rest of us
no,
can't.
It looks like somebody put a little star there.
Oh, y'all are teaching me stuff. How do you do that?
You go up to the top of the bar. So you get the drop box, and it says annotate. Just to the right of the pause, new share, pause share, annotate. And then you click that, and you can select what little, you can use a heart or a star, or that's really cool. Yeah, and I apologize if my baby picture is covering up where you are. Well, that's great. So I went back to school as a single mom when I was 22, and it was that same year that I found my birth mother. And so I feel like my journey in education has taken place in the same timeline as my journey to reconnect. So my perspective on this topic is not the same today as it was 5 years ago, because I'm continuously learning and growing in this space. And I'm just so grateful to every person, the elders, the other Indigenous engineers, some who are on this call, who have just held my hand and walked with me on this journey and understood that the disconnection was not my choice. As you can see, my adoption papers said birth father Irish, birth mother unknown. My mother was told when I was born not to put my race on my adoption papers. And so I didn't even know I was Cree Dene until I found her. And I share this, it's deeply personal, but I share it because it deeply drives why I do this work and why I want to share the work that I do, because it's not an easy journey, regardless of who you are, to step into this space that has such a hard history. And there's a lot of healing that needs to happen. So, you know, I want to encourage you to create spaces wherever you are that allow for this discomfort. And I love, Megan, that you talked about that at the very beginning, of just sort of recognizing when you feel discomfort and then allowing it, because that's where growth comes from. And so just clicking through, sorry. That's the Canadian that just came out, by the way. The Canadian, sorry. I'm stuck in annotation mode right now. There we go. Okay, so just a couple of pictures. How do I turn off the annotation thingies? Thank you. I'm going to click through some of these pictures because apparently I had slides to go with all the things that I just said. So talking about Indigenous science and creating ethical spaces, Elder Reg Crowshoe shares the concept of cultural safety, Western written cultural, Indigenous oral culture, and creating an ethical space. It's not about mixing them and creating, because you can create cultural confusion. It's about understanding that there are different worldviews and creating spaces for those worldviews to equitably exist. And so when we talk about Indigenous knowledge and ethics, it's really important to understand that there's a difference between Indigenous sacred knowledge, or sometimes referred to as traditional knowledge, and Indigenous personal knowledge, because there is a lot of protocols around sacred teachings. And so it's really important that when we talk about bringing Indigenous knowledge into education or engineering education, that we understand the difference and honor. It's when we talk about that ethical space, in Western culture, we have copyright laws, we have we have intellectual property laws and that sort of thing. And in Indigenous oral culture, that is around protocols and responsibilities of who can have that knowledge, who can learn that knowledge, and who has the right to share that knowledge. So I'm speaking to you as an Indigenous personal knowledge keeper, if that makes sense. And I don't self-identify as a sacred or a traditional knowledge keeper. And so maybe yeah, it's just important to understand the difference there. And so personal knowledge can come to us in many different ways. And so it can be gifts you're born with, things you've learned through education, through experience, through dreams, visions, intuitions, not bound by cultural protocols because they were gifted directly to you in one way or another. And it's important not to assume. So if you are in a situation where you're learning traditional knowledge, ask the knowledge keeper, can I share this? It's important to start exploring cultural appropriation and commodification. So in the general world, it can be pan-indigenizing sacred symbols and practices without acknowledging where they're from or getting permission from the nation. So like buying or using sage in a way that's not in alignment with teachings, wearing headdresses at music festivals, dressing up as Native for Halloween, or pan-indigenizing Native-inspired products or services without partnership or participation of nations for personal profit. And this is tough stuff to talk about. So it's just important to know that there is harm caused when this happens. Dior came out with a cologne called Savage, and hired Johnny Depp to be the spokesperson and basically promoted Native American culture in a way that was not accurate to promote their cologne. So it's really tough conversations, and it's where we have to sit with that those feelings that we have when this sort of thing comes up. So in terms of engineering and Indigenous knowledge, it's understanding that there's a difference between co-creating with Indigenous knowledge keepers and elders and appropriating from Indigenous knowledge keepers and elders. Research on Indigenous people and communities and not with Indigenous people and communities. Appropriation of sacred practices, items, or ceremony without the proper protocols or elder guidance. And taking knowledge, information, or resources from traditional lands without giving back to the communities, that culture of reciprocity. Another way that we can commodify or appropriate is only acknowledging accomplishments and contributions in a Western way. Letters behind the name, degrees, number of publications in Western journals, that sort of thing. Implementing Indigenous initiatives for profit or funding. It shouldn't be a check the box initiative. Inviting Indigenous peoples to join research at the 11th hour to have that participation. And finally, and this one is so important, expecting Indigenous students and faculty to carry the load in creating more inclusive spaces for Indigenous peoples without adequate compensation or accommodation to do so. We're not going to create more inclusive spaces unless everybody commits to being a part of that, that journey. So I know that time-wise, we're getting down to the last little while, and I really want to allow for that last breakout session. So if you'll forgive me, and I'll make all the slides available, Megan, that, you know, I'll go on, because I think it's really more important that we have the conversation. And if you want to hear more of if you want to hear more, like, I'd love to connect and invite anyone to connect with me after. Send me an email, let's have a call, and let's chat more about this. So I'm going to click forward, but actually, if you'll bear with me, what I'll do is I'll click through so you see what you're missing, just in a framework thing, because we're not really, I'm not cutting a lot out. It's just more of what I was talking about in some examples. But this one, to me, is so important. The benefits of really bringing Indigenous perspectives into engineering. I think it'll change the world. We have the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals globally. We are, as a planet, learning how to transition to a more sustainable energy system, and really working with Indigenous peoples and that deep connection and respect for the land, I think would be just such, there's so much value in that. I was going to talk about the Indigenous STEAM retreat that we have for Indigenous and non-Indigenous people in STEM. If you want to know more about that, please let me know. But the outcomes that came from our first retreat is that the importance of two-eyed seeing, honoring different ways of knowing, the importance of relationship, relation to the land, relation to one another, relationship with nations, communities, elders, and leaders. Time, that this takes time, building those effective relationships. So if you're working on a project, allow more than enough lead time before you even have a project-related question for the nation. Build those relationships early, engage, and create that space where there's trust, and then you can work forward on your projects. And in addition to the communities and nations we served, the participants really felt a desire to create community among us. And so I invite you to join our community of Indigenous and non-Indigenous engineering and STEM professionals. And so, final thoughts, hey, not bad. What is one key takeaway to discuss in your breakout group that you can implement and explore immediately? And how can you bring this back to make change in your institution, your workplace, and your classrooms? So Megan, if you could put that question and bring people together in breakout rooms that are larger, so we only have, say, 4 groups, and then we can come back in 5, we've only got 5 minutes left, so 3 minutes?
So one option is to let people sort of dissipate from their groups. That gives them time to have a little bit of a conversation. Do you want to do that?
Whatever you think works, I'm open.
So let's, let me give a couple of announcements, and then I'll push you to your groups and you can have those conversations. So if you're able to stay longer, then you can stay in that conversation and have a richer conversation. Does that work, Deanna? Okay, great. So my reminders is to look on, I'll email the whole registration list, some key reminders, but we have the conference coming up. So some of you aren't ASEE people, so if you're interested in that, I'll let you know. And I'll also let you know about all of the programming that we have. We've got a great lineup. It's also on our website. Sign up for the teacher sessions that we're gonna have. If you have an idea for a workshop that you'd like to teach, you can submit that on our website as well. And with that, I'm gonna push you all to your rooms and I'll send you the question through the chat. Okay, thank you all for coming. We'll come back if you are still here, but I just want to be thoughtful of people's time at the hour. Okay.
Yes, if you need to leave and I don't see you back here, thank you so much for joining. Thank you for bringing yourselves and your time, and and also thank you for your forgiveness in me learning this new way of delivering workshops.
Okay, opening the rooms now.
My email in the chat box, or Megan, is there a way that people can get my contact information?
So I will email everyone with some of the key things that we were brought up today, and I will include that in that email.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you.
And can you put a link to the recording? Sorry to interrupt you, Deanna.
No problem.
Yeah, so I'll send you the link to the page where the recording will be. I do not promise how long it's going to take me to trim it and put it on there.
No worries. Thank you.
So I guess before we sign off, for those that have stayed, thank you. I do appreciate and respect your time. Is there anything that anyone would like to ask before we go, or any final thoughts?
Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Hey, I just wanted to thank you for doing this. I've really gotten a lot to think about, especially in applying Indigenous perspectives to my work. And it was nice to meet everybody. And yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing the slides and finding out more about the conference as well, because that's all really interesting.
Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Deanna. I'm super eager for the distinguished lecture. Now I'm even more eager to get more into the
Oh,
I
thank
look
you.
forward to it.
I see there's a question in the chat about approaching conversations around sports mascots. That is a really tough one. And I think that somebody else mentioned nativeappropriations.com. It is a really, really good source. And Dr. Adrienne Keene writes about this sort of thing very often. And there's a lot of discussions on Twitter. You can follow and amplify the voices of Indigenous peoples on Twitter around this. I wish we could have these conversations more often, because I mean, we still have the Edmonton Eskimos as one of our teams, football teams. So yeah, it really is important that we start having these conversations.
I've tried to capture the key links that have been shared, and I'll put those on their website and the email follow-up as well.
Oh, and also you can, before you log off, if you're interested, you can, I think you can, if you go down to the bottom of the chat, there's 3 dots. If you click on those dots, you can save chat. And that will save the whole chat to your own computer. So any of the links or anything you can have right away.
Excellent. Okay, well, I just want to again acknowledge that I'll send some communication with follow-ups. If you're new to ASEE, feel free to reach out to me with any questions. And we're so glad that you chose to be here today and spend your middle noon part of the day, wherever you are in the world, with us. And we hope that you'll join us and continue the conversation throughout all of our summer series. We've got a really fantastic lineup of topics that are helping us push boundaries around increasing equity, access, and diversity within our engineering programs and with the engineering profession. So again, thank you all so much for your time. Deanna, thank you for sharing your wisdom and yourself with us today. We are grateful for that. And as Susan said, we're really looking forward to what we'll learn from you in addition for the talk at the conference. All right.
Wonderful. Thank you, Megan. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Be safe and take care. Be well.